You know they say revenge is a dish best served cold. But what they don't tell you is that the coldest revenge of all comes from beyond the grave, wrapped in legal documents and sealed with a lawyer's stamp. My name is Murray, and this is the story of how I made sure my son and his wife learned the hardest lesson of their lives, Mina, even after I was gone. I'm 60 minus 4, lived my whole life in Cincinnati, Ohio. I was married to my high school sweetheart Troy for almost 10 years before a construction accident took him away from me. That left me with our 7-old son Brandon, and from that moment on, he became everything to me. I mean everything. Those years weren't easy. I cleaned houses in the mornings, worked at a diner from afternoon until late at night, and picked up weekend shifts at the laundromat whenever someone called in sick. I was always tired, always sore. My hands constantly smelled like bleach and grease. But I made sure Brandon had what he needed. New shoes when his old ones got holes, school supplies, birthday parties with his friends. I didn't have much, but every cent I earned went to making that boy's life better. Brandon grew up to be everything I hoped he'd be. Quiet, smart, kindness-hearted. Never caused trouble, made excellent grades, and even helped out around the house when he could. When he left for college, I was proud but heartbroken. Still, he called me every Sunday without fail. That's my boy, I thought. That's how I raised him. It was at college where he met her. Alyssa. The moment he mentioned her name, I could hear something different in his voice. He was smitten. He told me she was sharp, classy, had this incredible drive and ambition. She was studying business law, came from some wealthy family up in Connecticut. I remember asking him what exactly she did, and he painted this picture of this sophisticated, successful woman who was completely out of our league. When I finally met Alyssa, I understood what he meant. She smiled too wide, talked too fast, and when she looked around my little kitchen, her expression was like she was visiting a museum exhibit called How Poor People Live. She was polite, sure, but there was this coldness underneath. Every word felt calculated, every gesture felt practiced. I tried not to take it personally. Maybe she was just nervous. They dated for about 2 years, and when Brandon proposed, I was genuinely happy for him. I wanted my son to find love, to build a life with someone who would cherish him the way he deserved. When they started planning the wedding, I didn't hesitate to offer help. I ended up paying for most of it, minus nearly wiped out my retirement fund, but it felt worth it. I wanted Brandon to start his marriage without debt hanging over their heads. After the wedding, they moved into this beautiful townhouse across the river in Kentucky. Still close enough to visit, but far enough that I only saw them on holidays and special occasions. Every visit felt formal, like I was a distant relative they had to tolerate rather than family. Alyssa never let her guard down around me. Every conversation was surface minus level, every interaction felt rehearsed. Then baby talk started, and everything shifted. They tried for over a year naturally, then moved on to fertility treatments. Pills, hormone shots, endless doctor appointments. I get these heartbreaking phone calls from Brandon in the middle of the night where he just needed someone to listen. He'd tell me about watching Alyssa cry every month when the pregnancy test came back negative, about the strain it was putting on their marriage, about feeling helpless and lost. When they found out IVF was their only real option, my heart broke for both of them. One cycle cost $18,000, and that didn't even include all the additional appointments, medications, and procedures they'd need. Their insurance wouldn't cover any of it. The moment Brandon told me, I knew what I had to do. I'll take care of it, I said without hesitation. Don't even think about it. The money is yours. That $18,000 was everything I had left in my savings account. Every penny I'd managed to scrape together over the years, every dollar I'd saved by buying generic groceries and patching holes in my clothes instead of buying new ones. But I wanted Brandon to be happy. I wanted to meet my grandchild while I was still healthy enough to enjoy it. Alyssa's reaction when I told them still stings. She didn't thank me, not really. She just nodded like she was doing me some kind of favor by accepting my money. Like I should be grateful she was allowing me to contribute to their lives. 9 months later, Ava was born. 6 pounds, perfectly healthy, absolutely beautiful. I went to the hospital the morning after she arrived, carrying flowers and a little yellow blanket I'd crocheted myself minus yellow with tiny daisies around the edges. I'd spent weeks working on it, every stitch made with love and anticipation. I dressed in the best clothes I owned. Black pants, cream blouse, my hair pulled back neat and tidy. I thought I looked presentable, maybe even nice. When I walked into that hospital room, My heart was so full I thought it might burst. Finally, I was going to hold my granddaughter. Alyssa was sitting up in bed, looking perfect as always. She gave me this once minus overlook, her eyes scanning me from head to toe with obvious disapproval. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You didn't dress for pictures." I smiled, confused. I didn't know we were taking pictures. I just came to hold her. Alyssa picked up a compact mirror and started touching up her makeup, not even looking at me as she spoke. "Not while you're dressed like that. You look dirty." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there frozen, trying to process what she'd just said. I looked at Brandon, waiting for him to say something, anything to defend me, to tell his wife that she'd just insulted the woman who'd given them everything. He said nothing. He just took Ava from Alyssa's arms and walked out of the room without a word, without even looking at me. I stood there alone, hands empty, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. The woman who'd paid for their fertility treatments, who'd made their dream of parenthood possible, wasn't even allowed to touch the baby she'd helped bring into the world because I looked dirty. I walked out quietly, held it together until I reached the elevator, then cried harder than I had since Roy died. After that day, everything changed. They stopped answering my calls. No updates about Ava, no photos, no invitations to visit. They had her baptized without even telling me, minus I found out 2 weeks later when Alyssa's mother posted pictures on Facebook with the caption, "So blessed to be surrounded by family." That one cut deeper than the hospital incident because it made their message crystal clear I wasn't family anymore. I stopped calling after that. I didn't want to force myself into their lives if I clearly wasn't wanted. But I never stopped thinking about Ava, wondering what she was like, whether she had Brandon's eyes or his laugh. 6 months later, I saw them at Target. Alyssa was pushing Ava in one of those expensive strollers, the kind that costs more than I made in a month. When she saw me, she didn't even slow down, just kept walking like I was invisible. Ava was asleep, sucking her thumb, looking like an angel. I almost waved, almost called out to them. But I didn't. I just watched my son and granddaughter disappear around the corner, then went home and cried until I made myself sick. That night, something inside me shifted. The sadness turned into something else, something sharper and more focused. I started working on my will. I wasn't dying, not yet anyway, but I was getting older. My back ached more than it used to, my hands were stiff in the mornings, and I was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. But more than that, I couldn't shake the thought that Ava would grow up never knowing who I was, never understanding the sacrifices I'd made for her family. So I wrote letters. One for Brandon, explaining everything I'd never been able to say. One for Alyssa, though I doubted she'd care to read it. One for Ava, telling her about the grandmother she'd never been allowed to know. And one final letter, sealed and labeled with very specific instructions to be opened on Ava's first birthday. I took everything to my lawyer in Covington, a sharp woman named Patricia who'd helped me with Roy's estate years earlier. I explained exactly what I wanted, and she helped me make it all legally bulletproof. 3 weeks before Ava's first birthday, I passed away peacefully in my sleep. Natural causes, the doctor said. Just worn out from a lifetime of hard work and heartbreak. They held a small service. Brandon didn't speak, minus couldn't, from what I heard. Alyssa wore designer black and cried for exactly 20-2 minutes, then spent the rest of the time networking with the other attendees. But the real event was Ava's birthday party. They threw a big celebration in their backyard minus balloons. Professional photographer catered food, dozens of guests. Alyssa's parents flew in from Connecticut along with what seems like half their social circle. It was exactly the kind of perfect, Instagram minus worthy party I could never have afforded to throw. That's when someone brought out the envelope. It was large, yellowed with age, sealed with red wax. Addressed to both Brandon and Alyssa, with clear instructions written across the front for Ava, to be opened at her first birthday celebration. Brandon opened it with shaking hands while the party continued around them. Inside was my letter, but it wasn't just words on paper. It was the beginning of something they never saw coming. Brandon, I had written, if you're reading this, it means I've already been buried and you've thrown a party without inviting the woman who paid for the reason this celebration is even happening. I could picture his face changing as he read those words, the color draining from his cheeks as the reality of what he was holding began to sink in. Alyssa, the letter continued, told me I looked too dirty to hold my granddaughter. My son, your husband, stood there and said nothing. That moment broke something in me that I can't explain, something that never healed. That's when I knew I wasn't part of your lives anymore, and I made peace with that. But I also made plans. The letter went on to explain exactly what those plans were. Because inside that envelope wasn't just my final words minus, it was copies of financial records, bank statements, and legal documents proving that the $18,000 I'd given them for IVF wasn't a gift. It was a loan that had never been repaid. Alyssa's perfect smile vanished the moment Brandon started reading the financial details out loud. "This isn't right," she muttered, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "She told us it was a gift." That's what she said. But I had never said that. Not once. I'd offered to pay for their treatment, yes, but I'd never used the word gift. And in Ohio, with proper legal documentation and witnesses, a loan remains a loan, even between family members. That's when Brandon found the second envelope, smaller and sealed even more carefully than the first. This one was addressed to Ava with instructions that it could only be opened on her 18th birthday. The envelope was legally protected minus they couldn't destroy it, couldn't open it early, couldn't make it disappear. If they tried, the trust I'd established for Ava would be frozen and donated to charity instead. The party atmosphere died completely. Half the guests made excuses and left early, the other half clustered in small groups whispering about what they just witnessed. Alyssa tried to salvage the situation, posting carefully cropped photos on social media that night, but everyone who'd been there knew the truth. 2 days later, Brandon showed up at Patricia's office, begging to find some way around the letter and its contents. She explained patiently that everything was ironclad, legally binding, and completely enforceable. But that was just the beginning. The real revenge was still unfolding. You see, the IVF money wasn't the only loan I made to them. 2 years earlier, when Alyssa lost her job and they couldn't cover the down payment for their dream townhouse, Brandon had called me in a panic. I'd given them another $30,000 minus $5,000 to secure the deal, also documented as a loan with proper paperwork. Now they were being hit with both debts at once minus over $50,000 they had no way to repay. Alyssa went into full damage control mode, posting on Facebook about how I was mentally unstable, how I'd manipulated Brandon, how I'd only given money to control their lives. She painted me as a bitter, vindictive old woman who couldn't accept that she wasn't wanted. What she didn't expect was how quickly people would fact-minus-check her story. When you humiliate someone in front of 40 witnesses at a birthday party, people remember. Neighbors, coworkers, even some of Alyssa's college friends started commenting with their own versions of events. One of them wrote, "You literally said she looked dirty and refused to let her hold her own grandbaby." That's all anyone needs to know about who the real problem is here. The post was deleted within 2 hours, but screenshots live forever. Brandon's work found out about the legal situation. Mine is not great when you're in a finance position at a local bank and suddenly under investigation for unpaid family debts. He wasn't fired, but he was reassigned to a much lower position with a significant pay cut. Their finances started unraveling quickly. They tried to refinance the house, but with liens being placed against the property, no lender would touch them. They missed 2 mortgage payments in a row, and foreclosure proceedings began. But here's the part I'm most proud of. The trust I'd set up for Ava wasn't just a simple savings account. It had very specific conditions attached. If Ava was being raised in a household under financial or legal distress, the trust would be held for review, and a court could decide to remove access until she turned 20 minus 1 or until her guardianship changed. I'd also hired a private guardian monitor as part of the trust terms. They would check in twice a year, quietly investigating whether Ava was being properly cared for. Not out of spite, but out of genuine concern for her well-being. That's how CPS ended up at their door 6 weeks later. The visit revealed more problems than anyone expected. Their refrigerator was half empty because they couldn't afford groceries. Their electricity had been shut off for several days earlier that month. Ava's room didn't have working heat because they couldn't afford to fix the broken vent system. Alyssa had quit her job to focus on being a stay-minus home mother. The caseworker noted signs of untreated postpartum depression. Alyssa was irritable, withdrawn, and admitted she spent most days in bed while Ava cried alone in her crib. It wasn't outright abuse, but it was neglect. And it was enough to trigger a temporary custody arrangement. Brandon and Alyssa were given 60 days to get their household back in order. The trust was completely frozen during this period, and a third-party guardian was assigned to supervise Ava's care. She wasn't taken away from them entirely, but she wasn't left alone with them either. The humiliation of having their parenting skills questioned publicly was devastating to their social standing. Alyssa's parents flew in from Connecticut, furious and threatening lawsuits. But Patricia calmly pointed them to the will's provisions, explaining that I hadn't taken anything from them, what I gave would only benefit those who truly deserved it. The next court hearing didn't go in their favor, because that's when the judge decided to open the second envelope early. The one meant for Ava's 18th birthday could be opened by judicial order if her parents failed as guardians. Inside was a voice recording I'd made in my kitchen, sitting at the same table where I'd eaten countless lonely dinners after they cut me out of their lives. "Sweetheart," I said to Ava, "if you're hearing this early, it means your mom and dad made some big mistakes. And I'm sorry about that. I really am. All I ever wanted was to love you. I wasn't perfect, but I worked hard every single day to make life better for your daddy. When I gave him everything I had left, he let someone talk down to me like I was dirt. He watched it happen and said nothing. I couldn't fix that while I was alive, but I made sure you'd have the truth. Just know that I always had your back, even when they didn't." The judge said he'd never seen a case quite like mine. Slowly, carefully, he assigned a new legal guardian for Ava's trust, my neighbor Elaine. Elaine was 60-7, retired, and had lived across the street from me for 30 years. She'd watched Brandon grow up, had sent birthday cards to Ava, even when Alyssa returned them unopened. Now she was Ava's temporary guardian until Brandon and Alyssa could prove they were stable again. They never managed it. Brandon took a job at a hardware store. Alyssa started selling skincare products online. The townhouse went into foreclosure, and they moved into a small apartment in the industrial district. No yard, no fancy parties, no design or anything. Just a fold-out playpen and secondhand clothes. Ava turned to in Elaine's care, and the difference was remarkable. She smiled more, started talking early, slept through the night consistently. Elaine sent monthly reports to the Guardian office with photos and updates. Brandon was allowed supervised visits, but Alyssa rarely came anymore. That's when Patricia filed the final document from my will minus an amendment to Ava's trust that sealed their fate permanently. All of Ava's future expenses minus college, living costs, everything she'd need to build a successful life minus were secured and protected. But none of it could ever be managed by her parents. They would never see another cent of my money, not for their house, not for their bills, not for rebuilding their lives. I left them one last letter, shorter than the others. You had everything. You had my love, my support, my money, my devotion to your family. And you threw me away like I was nothing. So now I return the favor. You get nothing. Not because I'm cruel, but because I believe in consequences. You made your choice in that hospital room. This is mine. Brandon wrote me a letter after everything was finalized. He didn't mail it minus, he left it at my grave. Elaine brought it to Patricia's office, and she read it to me over the phone. Well, she read it as if I could hear it, which in a way, I suppose I could. "Mom," he had written, "I failed you. I let her talk down to you, and I let you stand there with empty hands while I held the gift you gave us. Now I understand what that cost. I'm sorry. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope Ava grows up knowing the kind of woman you really were. I'll make sure she hears it from me, if she'll listen." I didn't get to read those words while I was alive, but I made sure he'd feel their weight for the rest of his life. You see, I didn't need revenge that was loud or dramatic. I needed revenge that would last, that would teach a lesson that could never be forgotten. Every month when they struggle to pay their bills, they'll remember the woman they treated like dirt. Every time they see Ava thriving in Elaine's care, they'll remember what they lost when they chose cruelty over kindness. And someday, when Ava is old enough to understand, she'll learn about the grandmother who loved her enough to sacrifice everything, and the parents who thought that love wasn't worth their respect. That's the kind of revenge that really matters. Not the kind that burns hot and fades quickly, but the kind that teaches lessons that echo through generations. The kind that makes sure the truth never gets buried, no matter how deep they try to bury it. They wanted me to disappear from their lives. Well, I gave them exactly what they asked for, but I made sure they'd spend the rest of their lives remembering why.